Hero, did you want to take the time to think about the standards of procedures a little bit closer? I know we have a one pager for the consensus flows that could lend itself to a more focused standard of procedures. Maybe it looking back at it, we'll see some things that can be added, not just to that one pager, but can be made into a more standard of procedures focused document as well. And this is what we discussed could be a good first issue for someone like Andre, um, coming into the clan flows, opting into it. A whole lot of gratitude for opting into it fairly blindly, but it's a good opportunity to introduce the tooling to folks as well. So yeah, I don't know if you wanted to focus on that a little bit today, but it could be a good one.
Um, I mean, sure. I'm not sure, like, but maybe we need him on the call, or we just raised an
Yeah,
issue.
well, I figured we could maybe get the doc together for him. I'm not sure if I did mention to him in the chat recently that we should maybe get on a call with him, but I know time zone wise it may be fairly hard. I vaguely remember maybe an earlier session that we caught him at, but we scheduled it maybe weeks ahead of time. So yeah, we'd have to figure out a real time call, but maybe we can use this time together. We got some new folks here too that could possibly guide us in the right direction, looking at it with fresh eyes. I don't know,
Yeah,
but if
sure.
you, yeah,
Let's
yeah,
give it a try.
okay. Let's see. Um, so we had this document that will likely lend itself to um, the standard of procedures fairly nicely. May not. It maybe should have all the contents of a standard of procedures anyway, so that it has the most clarity as possible. So maybe looking at it like that will help us uh, refine it a little. Try to get a link for you guys here. And let me know if you guys can see it okay. I'll drop it in the chat. All right. So it's these flows that I believe uh, Haas would like. It would be a good first issue for Andre, and maybe for the whole of the tooling. Um, I think we got this out without the tooling before, just in a singular post. But to put it through the clan flows is not a bad idea from Haas, and not a bad idea for someone like Andre, who are also learning what the tooling is going to be like. So let me know if you guys can see that okay. Um, it's in the chat for the channel, not the meeting chat. Let's see. Can you guys see it okay, the link?
Yep, I see it.
Good. Okay. All right. So this attempts to show folks what it would be like, to go through the system, but maybe we could, there's a few places where we give some caveats, right? Where we say, right now we don't have any representatives, so folks are going to have to, pick this up as a collective, right? I think that's said not once, a couple times in this actual one pager. Um, but um, maybe there's a couple more times we can do that to really walk folks through what the standard of procedures can look like. What do you guys think?
I think you might need to explain to the new people, like, what's the purpose of this? Like, what in the context of what, like, is to do with governance stuff, right? It's
Yeah, yeah,
or bringing up what type of things in this space.
yeah,
I think that will
yeah,
help grandma
yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure, for sure. And other folks can feel free to jump in on anything that they see me leave out. It's possible I missed something, but yeah, this is essentially our attempt to bring in a clan design flow that we've been working on, educating folks about who are consistent in these sessions, along with other folks. Um, we've scheduled real time sessions with whenever we can, who are also active participants and advocates. And the tooling had worked on its own fairly well for important decisions, decision making. It's really what this is focused on: is decision making flows, thinking seriously about so-called governance. Right, myself and Haas are one parts of a governance lab, um, uh, research and development focused, where we bring in all of the things mentioned earlier, and so this is really our first integration of the clan flow, along with tooling that proved pretty good for things like important distributions and advocates that happen weekly, and figuring out approaches for this and cool down periods of stacking pools and things like this. And so now this was our attempt at making the tooling that much more robust, right? Which was always the intention. A lot of holes in it without the clan design, which adds all of the bottom-up features that we referenced earlier, um, allowing for there to be truly uh, carved paths of empowerment right up to the representatives, at, to the edges of the system. And so the clan system becomes extremely important for that, for a lot of functional reasons in bottom-up structures. A lot of it related to the traits that the clans are associated with in the native cosmology, which we've been able to extrapolate to a Web3 ecosystem, right? And I think we're supposed to be able to do this fairly easily with these clans in the native context being framed as universal, right? To be able to be picked up by anyone trying to achieve long-term sustainability. And one of the big things that started to come through when learning of these structures of consensus flow between the clans, because the clans start to come into play when organizing into informal and formal consensus decision making in the native context. One of the things that started to come through clearly was autonomy. So you'll see autonomy referenced throughout the document. Again, one of the beautiful things that generators of value in blockchain-based systems efforts are usually, or a lot of times, very inspired by or ambitious with this in mind, is like the new possibilities of socioeconomic structures, right? And it kind of, you zoom out and you see that, well, autonomy is one of the things that we were the least familiar with, right? That's why we were so excited about the possibilities of Web3. But it can show how much easier said than done autonomy can actually be, right? It's not as simple as just a multi-signature wallet, right? It's also implies different structures that we, as generators of value, work and live in. And this is something that we are, again, not so familiar with. And so autonomy and the nuances of it start to get shaken up a little bit, particularly with the native lens on social organization. And the collective becomes one of the fundamental points where things start to get shaky, right? There's a huge lack of collective in, I think, our most conventional understandings of autonomy that then start to confuse what it actually is in the structures that we work and live in, right? Hyper-individualism skewing and loading the language in that way. It's starting to look a lot more like isolation and loneliness rather than autonomy or independence, right, or lack of interference, right? And the collective starts to get extremely important in the native context of autonomy, where you can ensure there's no interference because there's been consensus, right? And you don't get too invested in a given idea. And so this is one of the ways that we realize autonomy starts to play. But one of the things that we knew before realizing this was in the structures there were these matrilineal protocols that ensures the long-term protection of the voices of women, of ecosystems, of just the notion of regenerative concepts in general, right? Something key for long-term sustainability through complex dynamics, right? And there's autonomy reference there, right? The analogy that we often used was at the scale of nations, right? And the lack of interference in true diplomacy, right? But if there's interference before we come to the table for decision making, then that diplomacy is no longer authentic, right? And in the context of voices of women, of ecosystems, and Web3 ecosystems, right? We see that even in our own tooling before we implemented the clan design, is that you saw both women and men, probably a lot less women than men, as is the case even in open source culture, right? A problem that's yet to be seriously addressed, or there's just a lack of exposure to how to address it possibly, right? Although we saw both, right, and it would be hard in the long-term dynamics to ensure that the voices of women or ecosystems or these notions of regenerative commons, all of this doesn't get drowned out in the long term, right? It would be hard to track that without explicitly designing structures to ensure that it doesn't happen. And this is what we see in the flows in this document, where there's autonomous decision-making in both female and male clan flows. And then there's a coming together that streamlines those autonomous decision-making processes. And there's a streamlining effect as well in the informal consensus that happens before formal consensus in the autonomous part of the flows that you can see in the document. And so this is what you would see in the active issues right inside of our server using that policy kit tooling that I referenced earlier. And so this is what you see depicted in some of the diagramming. And the bulk of consensus happens in the preliminary consensus. And there's really like a 9 times out of 10 really no need for deliberation in the formal consensus processes when all of the clans are sitting together, both female and male. There's still that opportunity for deliberation when it's needed, but 9 times out of 10 it's extremely streamlined. And so here you see this streamlining of decision-making in a bottom-up context as opposed to a top-down boardroom context where voices are minimized. And this is seen as the most efficient means to avoiding gridlock and keeping things going. You see in these native protocols a couple different layers of streamlining for as many voices as possible, right? There's a bunch of different mechanisms that achieve this, right? It's not everybody... everybody has a voice, right? It's not everybody, speaking and giving the issues on the floor at any given time. There's times where the clans go into deliberation amongst themselves in the council process, but then there's times when there's a speaker on the floor introducing an issue, for example. The Wolf Clan is a big mechanism here. leading up to all these processes, gathering issues in the first place, ensuring that everybody's voice is being lodged who wants to in what they call the well. Um, so there's a direct line to decision making and having your voice heard in the heart of decision making processes for everybody that comes into the system. And this is a big part of that commons design referenced earlier. That tangible, felt access ability to the commons, which includes your voice or other voices validating your voice. How that's a huge for a paradigm shift away from hyper competition and scarcity as a foundation and towards regenerative abundance and access to it and mutual aid and support as a foundation, because the self-preservation doesn't make as much logical sense, right? If the former is felt and tangible, right? And so this becomes a critical function, right? The Wolf Clan. And you see these functions come up before the council process, right? In just general organization of any given system. But then you also see the traits become utilized in the council process, whether that's facilitating the meeting, facilitating the council processes, forming the issues, ensuring that these are all the issues that are brought to the floor are aligned before they're even spoken to. And so all of this is a big part of what's going on in these flows, that not necessarily in the standard of procedures that we can start to form out of this, but a big part of what was referenced earlier, and how all of these how these just three-tiered clan system, which can grow if it needs to, but how how it can start to relate right to both the organization and the structures of advocates, or right into the decision making of advocates, and how the traits start to take hold, right? And I not only discussed Wolf Clan, but in these flows you can also see the traits of turtle and bear as well. For example, turtles are observers, right? And in the formal consensus piece of the diagram and the page around it, of course, the turtles play a critical role in the decision-making process in terms of they're not necessarily active in deliberation. This is the wolf bringing an issue to the floor and deliberating with bear clans. But the turtle clan is observing whether this deliberation is happening in alignment with a code of conduct, for example, or an oral constitution, or core values of the community, right? And if there's something observed that is inconsistent, this is that 1 time out of 10 that the issue gets sent back for deliberation. And it gets sent back to not just any like arbitrary clan. It's being sent back to Bear and Wolf Clan. And it's in the traits of Bear Clan, which in the native context is Medicine Clan, to keep an issue alive, right? This knowledge of transition, right? And this intrinsic incentive design referenced earlier, starts to show itself here in decision making as well, right? It's this this incentive design that's speaking to these very deep traits, right? Rather than just your discipline or your background of knowledge, it's speaking to certain traits or tendencies that you might identify with yourself, or other folks might be able to help you identify with as well in the collective in terms of your function in the ecosystem. And so these are folks who have self-identified as Bear Clan, right? Who are all of a sudden right in the right spot when it comes to decision-making processes. And, and all of this in the context of the autonomy referenced earlier, is a lot of what the magic that you see in these consensus flows. I know this was a very general overview, but what you see in the diagram is the use of the Discord and active issues to lodge these issues. Some of what we've been going on over in the previous weeks and direct dialogue with the Longhouse has been the importance of an issue being fairly fleshed out before being lodged. The discernment of what would be a representative, a temporary representative in our case, to look at whether an issue is aligned before even picking it up, right? If it makes sense to go through all of the clans or just one of the clans, and making sure to disseminate the information properly. And so this is somewhat of the step that we're kind of collectively opting into, hopefully, in the meantime, before having representatives, where we're discerning, okay, what issues are going to be good and relevant for all clans, right, as we're testing out this tooling and models for the first time. How do we put it together in a way so it's comprehensive and not an open-ended issue? It's something that folks can actually sink their teeth into, right? And so this is the flow that happens before, usually restricted to representatives, but in this case, not the case yet. So it's all of us kind of going into this effort. But once that's lodged, the policy kit tooling that Haas has hacked away at now will allow for a window of time to start, to be decided on too by a given clan according to their scheduling and time zones, an acceptable window of time for bottom-up quorums, essentially. Folks coming together real time or asynchronous threads, gathering around a given issue, coming to positions on it, iterating on it, right? And so yeah, this is some of the first flows that will be a big part of these consensus flows, right? So yeah, the next steps after that is the other clans are also made aware of these issues kind of simultaneously, because this is one of the responsibilities of the reps. The wolf rep is to disseminate this across to the other reps, and kind of the responsibility gets diffused to the other clans, right? Female wolf clan, diffuses responsibility to turtle and bear clan, same on the male clan side. And so those representatives are responsible for ensuring the issues are coordinated around, facilitated through, the meetings happen, right? And positions are come to. And so these are separate autonomous processes at this period, the preliminary consensus. But this is where the bulk of consensus is had, right? There's communication between the two. They're not they're blind to what's happening decision-making wise, but it's a means of ensuring that we know the voices on either side are not being drowned out or influenced in a way of interference. And then there's a coming together. And that's what you see in the formal decision-making processes. And there's also a diagram showing the flow between turtle, wolf, and bear, and in deliberation flows, and also the positions in the physical council become important for another layer of autonomy referenced below, where there's this mechanism of the female turtles walking over to the male turtles in the final step of consensus, which is supposed to be in the protocols a reminder of how consensus is achieved, balance always coming from where there's more, this capacity for regenerative commons to understand hyper-extractive scarcity, but not vice versa, right? And so, for lack of making that too much more convoluted, I'll stop there. But hopefully it comes across of, seriously thinking about bottom-up power distribution, the ability to avoid some of the same, conventional pitfalls, right? There's things left out of this too that become relevant, right? Like the actual selection of representatives. which is, never an election, but always a selection through these very consensus processes. This becomes important because, there's a motif in the Native context of not even a perception of corruption, right? Is, a far cry from, again, our political familiarities, but a beautiful motif and rule of thumb to go by. There was this motif, I think, that lends itself to beautiful mechanisms that protect against nepotism, that protect against folks campaigning, who maybe